You ever hear of a guy traveling 408,000 miles but never going anywhere? How about the first person to ever hike the Appalachian Trail in one trip? I just found a couple more folders. We did an episode last week on unusual records, and sure enough, I was digging deeper into the same box and found two more folders, one on traveling, driving, and flying records, and another one on working records. So more unusual records to come in this week's episode. Before we dive in, I'd like to ask you to hit the bell to subscribe, leave a comment. If you like content like this, it goes a long way to helping bring back this 100-year-old brand for the digital age. All right, let's dive into the first of these two folders, traveling, driving, and flying records. I love stories like this that I find in these archives. They're just regular people. Andy Warhol once said, everybody gets 15 minutes of fame. And I often imagine these people, this was maybe the highlight of their life, right? Being featured in Strange as It Seems and being famous for something that they did or accomplished. And I always find these stories so poignant. I always did when I was a kid. They were just these faces and photographs and people, and I wonder if their family still remembers them. Obviously, most of these people wouldn't be alive even today, but fascinating. Here's one, Burwell Boudreaux. He floated 21 miles down the Santa Helena Canyon Rapids of the Rio Grande. Did it all in an inner tube. Crazy. It took him 9.5 hours. Pretty amazing. And then the line in here is, he must have been tired. Guess my that's my great uncle John Hicks loved dad jokes long before we called them dad jokes. But how about that? There's a few hitchhikers in here. Here's one from the John Hicks era. A little bit of a mystery here. Harold Eckes of Los Angeles. He hitchhiked 36,000 miles through 4 countries, did it in 18 months, and never used his thumb. Got a couple of driving records here. We've got Walter Kuhn. In 35 years of driving, Walter Kuhn has never had an accident, a traffic ticket, or a blowout. And he's been driving the same make of car since he began driving. I love this. Sometimes they send back the original letter, which was from John Hicks to Walter Kuhn. And then oftentimes they'll just corroborate or send a handwritten note on the back as well. But amazing driver. But there's also a woman driver. I love this. I think John Hicks probably found this in the LA Times on July 22nd of 1943. And it was actually written by Mrs. Edward Thurtell from Los Angeles. And she said, not to brag or boast or anything like that, but just to find out, who are the good car drivers? I would like to know if there are any women drivers who have done good work in the years gone by. I've been driving a car since July 13th, 1913, and have not once had a traffic ticket nor an accident, have never hurt anyone, or any car in any way made a spot on a perfect record of driving in 30 years. I've driven hundreds of thousands of miles since the days of no self-starters and coal oil lamps on our car. How about that? I wonder who has driven longer with a perfect score. I am knocking on wood. I'm just wondering if that is a good record. Mrs. Edward Thurtell, and John Hicks certainly wrote her back, and even got a nice handwritten letter from Mrs. I love these handwritten letters. And I guess he had to return the pic. There was a picture here that he used to draw the 1943 woman driver. I wonder what the hum's about. Mrs. Edward Thurtell. Perfect record for 30 years. Never injured anyone. Perfect record. And amazing that she lived on the island of Kauai. Crazy. She says, I am a student of the higher sciences and have been for 47 years. Kind of amazing. I'm a good astrologer and a good housewife and homemaker. As far as traveling records and mileage, I could not guess, but have driven to Portland, Oregon many times. It's several right here from Los Angeles. So amazing. Had 2 Fords and 5 Buicks. I wish I had in one basket all the money spent for gas in the 30 years. Mrs. Edward Thurtell. And here's a guy, John Vane. He's 16 years old. He's already traveled in 48 states, Canada, Mexico, and Europe, and has ridden in almost every known type of vehicle, but he's never been on a train. Crazy. Here's a great photograph of the kid and a letter from the beautiful Camp Paris in Paris, Texas. I'm 16 years old, born in Minnesota, but live in Texas. I've traveled in all 48 states in every kind of vehicle, but never ridden on a train. He said, here's some of the vehicles I've ridden: baby carriage, push cart, sleigh, wagon, tricycle, automobile, bicycle, motorbike, motorcycle, truck, bus, horse and buggy, wagon, ox cart, elevator. That's going to come back in a minute. Rowboat, canoe, speedboat, steamer, launch, hydroplane, aeroplane, dirigible, tractor, dog cart, Irish jig, Danish jig, horse, donkey, mule, cow, calf, goat, but not a train. And here's the answer in relation to that last one, to the question at the top of the episode. Have you ever heard of somebody who traveled 408,000 miles without going anywhere? How about that? Check out Barney Garland, New York City. Traveled over 408,000 miles without going anywhere. He was an elevator operator in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. How about that? So all the miles, he went 408,000 miles in an elevator, and I actually have from Ted Saucer, the Waldorf Astoria. Amazing. This was actually directly from them, featuring him. Barney Garland, elevator operator at the Waldorf Astoria, has traveled 408,436 miles on the job during his many years of service at that hostelry. He began working for the old Waldorf in 1902 and has continued at the same job since 1902, and this is in 1938. Crazy. Except for a period of 2 years during the construction of the new Waldorf Astoria from May 29 to August 1st, 1931, when he operated elevators for another large New York hotel. Garland has worked 8 hours a day, 312 days each year. It's estimated they average 40 complete up and down trips per hour at 600 feet per trip. That's how they figured it out, making a total of 2,156,000, 2 billion feet. Oh, they were doing feet. 2,156,544,000 feet in his 36 years of work, converted into miles. That's how they did it. Would cover a distance 16 and a half times the circumference of the earth. Wow, the amazing Barney Garland, elevator operator for the Waldorf Astoria. In 1944, John Hicks passed away. He died on D-Day on June 6th, 1944, from myocarditis. Had nothing to do with the war. But his brother, my grandfather, Ernest Hicks, took over. We got a couple in this folder from Ernest. We have Dick Clark and Ed Clevenger. They drove, this is in, what year is this? This is 1946. They drove a 1913 Model T from Waco, Texas to Alaska and back. Crazy. The Alcan adventure here. There's a photograph of the old 1913 Model T. On a sizzling hot day in July, the folks of Waco, Texas came out to wave goodbye heartily to a pair of crazy redheads and a 1913 Model T Ford. These two goofy characters, abetted by a museum piece jalopy, had a vague idea they could get to Alaska in 20 days. Page Buck Rogers. Texas to Alaska was 6,000 miles, and back again was 12,000 miles. It seems that one goofy character, Dick Clark, had spent 2 years working on the Alcan Highway. The cold must have got him. Crazy. And the other one from the Ernest Hicks era in this folder is Sir Owen of Scotland. He walked 74 miles in 6 days. That's incredible enough, but he did it at the age of 124. How about that? He lived exclusively on milk, honey, vegetables, water, and wine. Did this back in 1725. The great Sir Owen of Scotland. And wrapping up this folder, we'll go into the era of Elsie Hicks, as we always do. Here's a bunch of really cool photographs of the 1953 champion teenage driver of the U.S. and Canada. Is James Mihalik of Honolulu, another Hawaiian driver with only 9 months of licensed driving experience. He won over 47 finalists, all of whom had an average of 2 years driving experience. He received 884.5 points out of a possible 1,000, 27 points more than the runner-up. And here's the kid with his trophy and his car. Amazing. Never even knew they used to have like driving contests. And we even have a letter in here from Liberty Mutual, the insurance company, I guess, who held the event and gave the award. Kind of amazing. We've got Betty Bennett. How about this? For all you pilots out there, this is kind of an amazing fact. At the age of 10 years old, she solo flew. It's in Cuba, because obviously it's against the law in America, but she did it in Cuba at the age of 10, and her brother Al soloed at the age of 12 in Mexico. Crazy. So Betty and Al Bennett, it is true that as far as we know, Betty and Al are the 2 youngest people ever to solo. Since it's illegal to solo in this country under age 16, we went to considerable trouble to get permission for Al to solo in Mexico. This is on March 26, 1951. And for Betty in Cuba on January 4th, 1952, Al had just had his 12th birthday when he soloed, and Betty was 10 years old. She's 11 now and will be until next April. One of the principal purposes of these projects is to publicize the Taylor Craft airplane. Of course, this is on Taylor Craft letterhead. So if you can possibly get the words Taylor Craft airplane in, we'll appreciate it very much. This is Alfred Bennett, the father of the 2, who is vice president at Taylor Craft. Here's a fascinating human. Dr. Eugene Payne, his record was for the last 23 years, he made 24 trips abroad, crossed the equator 32 times. Some really nice photographs here of Dr. Eugene Payne. I see him here as well. And basically had a really interesting job. That's what did it. Bureau of Industrial Service letter here, acknowledging the letter, a portrait, but 38,000-mile tour, basically to report that malaria at the time remains world's biggest medical economic problem. So just back from a 38,000-mile, 6-month survey of progress in tropical medicine, Dr. Eugene Payne of Park Davis and Company reported here that malaria remains the biggest medical and economic problem in the world today. Famed clinical investigator, made 24 trips abroad, crossed the equator 32 times in the last 23 years on medical missions, strange as it seems. And another extraordinary driver, this one with 40 years of driving. Here's the record, it looks like, without an accident, at least in these files. Amazing. Great handwritten letter here from J.B. Marshall. He's 80 years old, retired banker. Dear Miss Hicks, I'm replying to your letter of March 25th. My home is in Carbon, Indiana, 6 miles from Brazil. Your letter was forwarded. I've lived here all my life, 80 years. I run the Carbon Bank for 43 years, was the sole owner for the last 25 years. I closed my bank in June 30th, 1946, was robbed 5 times. Most robbed bank apparently in the USA. Crazy. I worked at Summer in Brazil Bank during vacation time, and I drove my 1937 Packard Auto for 18 years, over 140,000 miles. And my last day home, I drove 470 miles. Not bad for a man over 80 in a car over 18 years old. Amazing. And finally gave up the car at 80 years old. The amazing J.B. Marshall. And the final 2 stories from this folder. Donald Knies, I guess, Knies of Corinth, New York. Amazing hitchhiker. In 27 months, he visited 48 countries, traveled 80,000 miles, and the best part, he spent less than $1 a day. Crazy. I have a handwritten letter here from Donald Neese, as well as a great little article, LI Youth Hitchhikes Around the World. Crazy adventure, especially at that time. Kind of makes you reminiscent, sadly reminiscent of a time you used to be able to trust people and be able to hitchhike your way around, but kind of amazing. My trip was, for me, a wonderfully interesting experience. I traveled for 27 months, visited 48 countries, and hitchhiked most of the way. The enclosed clipping from the New York Herald Tribune is correct in all details, except the amount of money, which was given as $300. Actually, he started with $1,000 and he returned with $300, so it was $700. But he was able to make the trip at a cost of a little less than $1 a day. Oh man, those were the days, huh? Donald Neese from Corinth, New York. And the final one from this folder, and this is near and dear to my heart, having hiked several sections of the Appalachian Trail. But amazing, this guy, Earl Schaefer of York, Pennsylvania, apparently was the, this is a mountain footpath, as we all know, from Georgia to Maine. He was the first hiker to make the more than 2,000-mile stretch in one trip. Took him 124 days. And I love this. Here's a letter from the Appalachian Trail Conference, on the back of which has a great map of the Appalachian Trail. May 3rd, 1952. Pretty amazing. The information is largely correct, but some discrepancy should be noted. Whether to say that I lived largely on cornbread is questionable, although not a distinct error. I did eat more pan-baked cornbread than anything else on the trip, and suggest that you refer to it as staple food. Amazing. However, I will not object to the use of lived largely. So apparently that was the quote there, but I don't think it made it into the story. But the trip required 124 days, and Associated Press carried the story. This is Earl Schaefer, Route 1 from York, Pennsylvania. First one to hike the Appalachian Trail all the way. Next, we'll tackle this folder on working records. We'll get through this working records folder pretty quickly, I think, because it's all just from the era of John Hicks, but amazing jobs in the 1930s too. Kind of a amazing subject to be covering right now with AI disrupting the workspace. It's kind of amazing to go back and think about the work people did 100 years ago, right? So we've got Miss Emma McMahon. This was from 1931. At the age of 109, she earned her own livelihood. Kansas City, Missouri woman makes enough with her needle to maintain her own apartment and save a little for old age. At 109, here's she receiving a bouquet of flowers on her 109th birthday. Love this one. Here's Marvin Morales from Aledo, Oklahoma. At 5 years old, he picked 174 pounds of cotton in one day. Another one of these handwritten letters on the back. Actually, this was from the era of Elsie Hicks. I realized this was the one from the Elsie Hicks era. So here's the letter from Elsie, but a handwritten letter on the back from Mrs. Joe Morales. She said, I'm sending you some snapshots of Marvin. They're not too good, but the best I have right now. I didn't take any while he was snapping cotton, but this is some we were taking right after the cotton snapping was over. Very proud of Marvin for he could outsnap some of the older children. He's the youngest of my 6 children. He's just 5 years old, and we let him snap on his own accord, and he always got his 100 pounds a day. And over one day, he said he was going to snap 200 pounds that day, and that was the day he got 174 pounds of cotton snapped in one day. And then here's another cotton picker. This one is T.V. Smith. He's an Illinois congressman in the Illinois legislature. Apparently he picked 413 pounds of cotton in one day when he was just 13 years old. And then here we have a couple of sisters. I love this. These old handwritten letters as well. And a beautiful photograph of these two sisters, Catherine Swanson and Merle Whitrock from Larrabee, Iowa. Together, apparently they husked 202 bushels of corn in just 9 hours. Some really fascinating. That letter, it's incredible. I should just post it because it's just so endearing. Literally like a 10, 20 page letter. And then we have John Leahy here. Apparently he opened 1,000 oysters in 45 minutes. This was back in April 2nd of 1886. No idea if that's still holding, but pretty amazing. Can you imagine shucking 1,000 oysters in 45 minutes? Crazy. We got Henry Kane. Here's some people that worked at their job quite a long time. I have the letter corroborating from the Pennsylvania Railroad, but Henry Kane, he was a Pennsylvania Railroad employee. He outlasted 7 presidents of the company. He was on the job for 50 years. There's a great picture here of Henry Kane. 50 years in the same job. Crazy. And then Jack Quinn, even better. Here's the end of a perfect record. From Beverly, Washington, he worked as an employee of the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad. 55 and a half years. And here's the amazing thing. Without once taking time off for sick leave. And then on the day before his retirement, he was bitten by a dog and had to go to the hospital. Retired December 1st, 1937. Can you imagine working 55 and a half years without taking any time off? Crazy. And one more kind of amazing worker here with a long time record. We've got Jonas Burcham at 75 years old, had just been certified apparently as a lifeguard again at the Blair, Nebraska municipal swimming pool. He's saved over 100 people in his life. There's a photograph of him in the newspaper and a letter from the Blair City Schools from Blair, Nebraska. Amazing. 73 years old, being born in September of 1861. He's been employed as head lifeguard of the Blair swimming pool since 1931. Crazy, amazing. Greatest feat was that of saving 7 Boy Scouts in a river once. Wow. Crazy. Total savings of life on and off duty. Lists over 100 people saved. Amazing lifeguard James Burcham of Blair, Nebraska. And then here's an amazing, there's 4 of these guys, and this is just fascinating to me. Talk about a job that you never see anymore. But these are all really amazing accomplishments of newsboys. How about this? So we got Frank Conti. He was the Chicago Times newsboy. He's been selling papers on the same corner for 32 years, and he made the news when he got a greeting back. He sent a letter to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and got a letter back or a signed photograph of FDR, and he was featuring it there. And it was amazing. Sent that photograph of that of him. Merry Christmas. This was his Christmas card from Frank Conti, and I guess he had a card for 32 years, and then he sent a couple years. This was 1937. 32 years on one corner, and then 2 years later he updated with 34 years. So he was still doing it 2 years after this. A couple of handwritten letters here from Frank Conti, and then we have another. The second of these 4. Here's 54 years on the same corner. This is the record of Emil Lindner, 68, Chicago newsboy. Sold newspapers at 18th and Western since he was 14 years old. The amazing thing, I love these handwritten letters. We got a picture of Emil. What a beautiful, look at that. Look at his handwriting. Absolutely gorgeous handwriting from this guy. And the reason I point this out is the next guy. You can't believe this. And there's a little picture of Emil. But then we've got another newsboy who beat his record, completely different handwriting. This is amazing. Check out this. So that's Emil's handwriting. And here's Mose Salinger. He sold papers on the same corner, also a Chicago newsboy, for 58 years doing this. That's incredible, isn't it? Clark and Madison Streets in Chicago from 1879 to 1937. Yeah, completely different handwriting there from Mose, but he beat out Emil's record. And then there was one more newsboy here that was pretty amazing. This is King Cole. Kind of amazing. That was his nickname. Sam King Cole. Great photograph of Sam here. He's over 41 years, he's sold every major daily newspaper in the U.S., 9,000 different periodicals, and took 4 trips around the world. Really amazing guy here. Now on his 5th, and he hopes last, trip around the world, sold every daily paper in the U.S. There's about 2,200 papers at this time in the U.S., over 3,000 in the U.S. and Canada. And he sold them all. Bums his way around the world selling newspapers. Lectures to newsboys, Rotary, Kiwanis clubs, anything else to keep going. I love this. Has a grown daughter whom he put through college by selling papers, and in parentheses says, not bad to look at either. Speaks parts of 83 languages and dialects. Amazing guy. What an incredible newsboy's king. A world-traveling newsboy. Put his daughter through college. Crazy. You never see that anymore, huh? How about that? King of the newsboys. Oh, and I love this photograph. A signed photograph, actually, of King Cole to John Hicks, strange as it seems. Amazing guy. Well, that wraps up this episode. More amazing, unusual records and fascinating people long forgotten from almost 100 years ago. Some of them were born in the 19th century. But thank you so much for joining. If you like content like this, stories of the strange, unusual, science, nature, sports, history, please hit the bell to subscribe. Like, follow, please leave a comment. Let me know one of the stories that really caught your eye. And as I always do, I'll wrap up this episode with the foreword from John Hicks's first book, published in 1928. The author launches this book of the curious in nature and humankind on the vast sea of public opinion, with the hope that it will fulfill its mission to entertain and acquaint its readers with some of the marvels of the world in which we live.